Hi, I'm the Moonlit Page Turner, and this is Podcast Reads, a series where we look at some books from some of our favorite podcasters. And in this episode, we are going to dive into the drama with the Drama Queens. So, if you're not familiar with the podcast Drama Queens, it came out in June of 2021, and it has three of the cast members of the show One Tree Hill. It is a rewatch podcast where Hillary Burton Morgan, Sophia Bush, and Bethany Joy Lentz rewatch the episodes and talk about not only what the episodes are about, but the stuff that happens behind the scenes. Now, this was supposed to be a podcast where these three ladies came together and strengthened their friendship while reliving a really awful experience that all three of them had when they were on the show. One Tree Hill took place between 2003 and ended in 2012. And all three women had not the best experience. And a lot of that had to do with the creator of the show, which they do not name in the podcast. Or if an actor that they bring on names him, they will bleep his name out. And so, once again, this was supposed to be like them coming together and showing female friendship. Now, recently, there has been some drama in the Drama Queen cast. Robert Buckley, who was an actor on One Tree Hill, he was brought on to almost replace Hillary Burton Morgan. Hillary actually introduces him and gives him a warm welcome, but since then, Hillary Burton Morgan has not been on the podcast. Now, there has been quite a few rumors, and it has not been corroborated between the three ladies, although it has been mentioned on Bethany Joy Lentz's book tour that there is a falling out between Hillary and Joy. And that may have to do with the books that Hillary and Joy both put out within the last couple of years. So Sophia Bush does not have a book out, but I have read both of Hillary Burton Morgan's, and I just finished Bethany Joy Lentz's books. So let's talk about it. Okay, I'm going to start with talking about Hillary Burton Morgan's two books, and then we'll get into Bethany Joy Lentz and kind of the controversy that we're seeing between those two books. But Hillary's first book, which is The Rural Diaries, came out in May of 2020. She talks a little bit about her time on MTV. One Tree Hill is mentioned in there, but she spends the majority of her book talking about life after One Tree Hill. So she talks about meeting her husband. She talks about her time on White Collar, her Christmas movies, and also finding their family farm, which is Mischief Farms. She talks a lot about personal experience. It is a very emotional book. For this one, I actually listened to it, and she does read it and does a fantastic job. I actually rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. I was walking around listening to it, and I started crying. She talks about her fertility issues. She does build quite the family around her in New York, as well as buys a candy shop that she and her husband, as well as their friends, run today. So, Rural Diaries, I really, really loved. I've actually gifted it to two other people since I read it. It is a fantastic read. In October of 2023, Hillary comes out with her second book, which is entitled Grimoire Girl. And so she is kind of like witchy. She is into like mystical, magical things. Some of this book does deal with personal stories. However, most of it is kind of magic adjacent, or I would say magic light. She talks about doing rituals and creating potions and making your own grimoire. She talks about the magic kind of in her family, which is kind of Appalachian family magic, granny magic, which is supposed to be passed down from woman to man and man to woman. And so she kind of gets skipped because her grandmother can't pass it down to her. And so she has to do her own investigation into the world of like witchcraft and things like that. I have studied Wicca and other cultural and religions, and I found, again, this book to be a little bit more magic light. It's got quotes, and each chapter is about a different like concept. And then so she's like making friends with ghosts, and she's got personal stories about living in a haunted house. And then she talks at the end of each chapter. It has this little section of like parties and potions. And she talks about creating your own She talks about this like paper mail and the importance of words and writing things down and the art of letter writing and the coven you keep and keeping people around you. So while everything is a magical, um, like synchronicities and creating your own grimoire and creating your own tarot deck. And so everything again is tied around magic and but also tied to personal stories. For this one is not as emotional as the Rural Diaries. I found this one not to be as great. I think if you're into witchy stuff, you're gonna really like it. There was something that irked me personally, where she goes to this friend's garden, and the grandfather of the friend has made this garden have to do with Dante and Dante's Inferno, and she's telling information about Dante's Inferno, which is not fully correct. I used to teach Dante's Inferno as an English teacher, so I do know a little bit more about it than the average person. And so as I was reading it, I was like, "Oh no, that's not right." So I wish she would have read it herself or gotten a little bit more information on that before putting it in this book and stuff like that. Like when you're listening to an audiobook and they mispronounce a word, it just like takes me out and it's a little irksome to me. That is a personal opinion, and that can sometimes ruin a book. So I did like this book, although Rural Diaries I would suggest reading over this book. Now, this book and Bethany Joy Lentz's book is one of the rumored issues with the drama queens. So we have Grimoire Girl, which looks like this, and then we have Dinner with Vampires, which a year later Joy Lenz comes. And so I read all three books in three different platforms. Because you'll see the picture, because I read Dinner with Vampires on Kindle. So I've read the book, the Kindle, and the audiobook for the different three books. Dinner with Vampires. I would say if you're really interested in learning about this, but don't want to read it, Chelsea Devontae has a podcast series, and her podcast reads will be coming up soon because she also wrote a book, but she does a podcast series about celebrity memoirs, and she read it with one of her podcast listeners. They're called Cookies, are her fans. And one of the other person that was on the podcast with her gave some of the background information of why there's drama with the drama queen. So she did an excellent job at explaining what some of the issues were, and I'll link that below as well, so you know where to find that. But Glamorous Trash, it used to be called Celebrity Book Club, but it's a fantastic podcast. So part of the drama with the drama queens is that the covers are similar. You'll see with Bethany's book and then with Hillary's is that they're both looking at platform. It's the circle in the middle. In the book world, and Chelsea Devontae brings this up, is especially if you're a first-time author, your control of what is on your book cover is very small. That is more from your publisher. And there is a big chance that Bethany's publisher was trying to grab on to the fame and the well-knownness of Hillary's books, because Hillary is a best-selling author. So it is very possible that it was her publisher and not her. There are some other dramas between the two women as well, but again, it has not been corroborated by the two women, and so there could have been just a misunderstanding, but we read between the lines, and definitely Reddit has helped connect some of those lines. When it comes to Bethany's Joy Lentz's book, I was not a fan. I felt like it was a little immature. Things that she writes about, I feel like, were really important. So one of the other things that got brought up with why they may be beefing is because the girls agreed to write a book together about their time on One Tree Hill. Now, Rural Diaries came out before the podcast. So yes, Hillary has already written about it, but that was before the podcast even started. Bethany does talk about her time on One Tree Hill very, very briefly. It is more about her life in the cult, which is why it's Dinner for Vampires, and she does equate it to Dracula characters. She renames characters. She renames her own husband, which is public knowledge, which that to me was weird, but it may have some lawsuit thing, so potentially she calls him Quiet Boy, although we know who he is, and we also know who all these other characters are as well. So I'm not quite sure why she had to rename them. but it could just be for legal reasons. Most of the book is about her time in this cult. She spent multiple years. Obviously, she marries, her husband is in the cult because he is the cult leader's son. And her husband do have a child together, which her child is old enough to read this book. So that I felt like was also interesting. A lot of this also has to do with her religion, which is how she got into the cult in the first place. She went to a Bible study. That Bible study um, evolved to being this small cult thing where you have a religious leader, and she ends up moving to a different state to be with his family. They are very restrictive on what she can do on One Tree Hill, and she takes her religion very seriously. Although there was some contradictions because they were talking about someone in the Bible, and she's like, "Oh, I read my Bible daily, and I don't know the story." And that to me was a little concerning because I'm like, if religion is so important to you and they're talking about like Jezebels and things like that, I'm like, how do you not know that story? So there were some conflicting pieces of information in the story. There is a lot of metaphors in the way that she writes. A lot of people really like this book. I did not like the way it was written. I also felt like it was super judgmental in the way that she talks about people. And that is one of the flaws that she says the cult leader brings up about her and like, uses it as a manipulation tactic. But then we see it within her own writing. Even when she's talking about her castmates on One Tree Hill, she can't spend time with them because they're not religious. And so that would look poorly on her. Instead of, being kind and reaching out to these people and being an example, she decides to isolate herself because of her religion. So there were a lot of contradictions in this book. And I felt like she needed more time to be away from it and to reflect on it. I know it's been some time, but I feel like she's still currently in her healing process because they took like $2 million from her. Like, they had access to her bank account and she didn't know. She didn't ask any questions either. So there's a part of the book where at the very end, she's talking to her about cults, and they're like, how would you not know? And she's like, would you blame someone who was in a physically abusive relationship for being in that relationship? Like, can you judge someone for being like that with the financial institution? And so she gets like that and is very judgmental about it. And it's like, yes, it's horrible what happened to her, but she needs to take some responsibility about what happened to her as well, because she says it several times. She just shut down. She just decided not to ask questions, and she just kind of let God take over and hope that that would protect her instead of asking those questions, instead of being her own advocate. And it's just, I don't know, it's interesting to me and was really like a disconnect. I think a lot of people will identify with this book because religion has been like tipping point for quite a lot of people. Other people have a more casual relationship with it. Some people have a really big relationship with religion, and some people like religion was really helpful for. So I feel like there is a wide variety of people who will read this book and see parts of their life in it. I didn't feel like it was written that well. I felt like Rural Diaries so far out of the three books was my favorite. I also don't think that it was enough to be beefing about. I guarantee there was other things happening because you could see it in their dialogue as well, and the way that they kind of to each other or didn't talk to each other. And then of course you know fans putting in their 2 cents. So I kind of they would be more transparent because that was their whole podcast was about transparency. But at the same time, it's none of my business. It's their relationship, and would just like to see kind of be able to work through it to be the example that they wanted to be. But at the end of the day, it's their lives. So when it comes to the three books, Rural Diaries, Grimoire Girl, and Dinner with Vampires, I would say definitely check out Rural Diaries. It's a fantastic book. It made me cry. And I got a lot from that book. I think Grimoire Girl is something that's very niche, and like if you're into kind of stuff, I think would be a fun book or like a good gift to give to someone. Dinner with Vampires, I would say if you're gonna read it, I would borrow it from the library. But I just felt like she wasn't ready to go through and write about it. There's a lot of raw emotions, but I don't think they're fully processed yet.